Ladies and gentlemen, and fellow artists, hey, welcome back to Lead-Based Studios. I'm Nick Feutz. Alright, now today I'm trying a little bit of a different setup because I'm actually back to my drawing desk and my table is lifted up. It's no longer flat. So I'll be going over today, not so much a drawing video, as kind of a history of the brine, the secret origins of the brine, if you will. This is where the idea originated from. Now, I'd heard about the 24-hour comic day from a couple of artists online, watched a couple of videos, heard about the challenge, and I liked the idea of it. And a few years ago, I contended with a couple of local artists at the local comic shop, and I tried it before on my own and failed. And I anticipated this time I'm going to do it. I've got a plan. I'm going to be around a bunch of other artists. I'm going to be able to keep myself on task and come up with something. And I was excited that if I did come up with something, I would try to polish it up and then actually work off of it, maybe publish it, sell it. And let's be honest, the original inception and the follow-through, it would not have worked. It wasn't working. Because of the premise of the 24-hour comic day challenge, you have to come up with the idea, you have to draw it, you have to write it, do the lettering, everything, and you have to get the comic book to what would be considered print ready. So it had to at least be black and white and inked. And I didn't even get ink to page yet with all these pages. I managed 20 pages of penciled, and I barely even say line art. It was rough layouts. That's about as far as I got. And that's mainly because, as you'll see, I was working on full-size Bristol pages because, again, I was hoping this would turn out to be something in the long run I could eventually turn around and sell. Well, this incarnation of it, not so much. But it's what kind of spawned the idea and started spiraling into something better that I would work on later to eventually create The Brine by Lead-Based Studios. So without further ado, let me go ahead and jump into the 20-page comic book that was kind of the hen scratching that created The Brine. So given the premise, it starts off with, hold on a second. Starting to get that transition on screen again. Transparency. There we go. Okay. So it starts off with an establishing shot of this very rocky, spiky, unfriendly terrain, and then I wanted to pull back from that shot to actually show it was nothing more than landscape inside an aquarium. Now, the original comic book didn't have any of this watercolor work done on it. I had done this only just recently to test out a few watercolor techniques for the actual Brine comic book, to which I later eventually kind of honed in what watercolor technique I wanted for the dreamlike environment that is the actual real world, not the actual brine. So as I pulled out, there was a third panel here at the bottom of the page, which I also cut off, and I kept as a reference, because I did a full watercolor rendering on that, which I thoroughly approved, and that's kind of part of my reference folder now. But it was essentially a side shot of the young boy and his tank. He apparently had his favorite goldfish or a betta fish or something along those lines. I made up this idea that he already had some kind of aquatic life that passed away. And his mom was introducing him to the idea that, like she was handing off a little packet and it was a mystery as to what it was, and she was saying, like, give it a try as she sort of leaves the room. And he's like, okay, so he rips open the packet, and of course it ends up being a sea monkey's packet. Now these are just random fingers that I drew on later on because I was trying to get like a skin tone watercolor. I was going back and forth between like a gray blue and just a dull gray. But there weren't actually fingers inside the tank. That's just supposed to be a tank, and you see the little seeds and stuff dropping into the tank. And then the other last panel over here as well, I also cut that off because I was using that again for another watercolor reference. But the story rolled on to the extent where he watched his own character. You can see there's just the little brine shrimps kind of growing panel by panel and getting bigger until eventually, by the last panel, you can tell there's definitely a very ape-like face staring back at the boy, and he's startled looking into his own fish tank, like, oh goodness, what'd I create? And then you get this huge hero splash page establishing the hero of the comic, and it's this very masculine, almost silverback-esque, but vertical standing, bipedal-looking sea monkey. So you see his long tail. And then I've emphasized the horns as opposed to some sort of little dangly fins and stuff. I emphasize these horns as opposed to antenna because he's supposed to be maybe the king in this story. He was born into sort of being the king. And so he acknowledges his own creator. His own creator's looking at him like, oh my gosh, whoa. And so I just sort of did this homage to the idea that although he's looking into the fish tank, it's not actually the same size as his head, but I just kind of, enlarged the two to make it look as though they're equals or mirrored opposites of each other. And then there's this moment here where he kind of touches his hand to the glass like he's disconnecting and then swims off into the horizon, and our hero kind of disappears into his adventure. And that's when the story would actually begin. We see this lone character swimming through what I didn't even think of being the brine at the time, just his sort of underwater world. And he comes across another small little thing that apparently is missing that little divine spark. So as he comes into contact with it, it sort of grows right before his own hands and becomes this sort of female character, as if he generated his own love interest, from his own divine touch. So she's sort of learning to swim, and she sort of poofs, and there's a wafting of bubbles and stuff. Then their hands kind of connect. They interlock fingers, and then they get into this love entwine, and their tails shaped around to create this frame. And the pacing of the story, I admitted, was very manic because it was like a 24-hour comic day challenge, and I'm scrubbing through these pages, making it up kind of as I go. And I'm just sort of hoping that it'll end up coming out good. I had no idea what I was going to be drawing next. I just had a central premise that it would be very 1980s Saturday morning cartoon. And so I got this sequence here where we now establish a cityscape like it's a whole kingdom. And there's all these other sea monkeys swimming in towards the kingdom over the course of this 3-panel split. And then I have another 3-panel split, but vertical, where we see the kingdom in the distance, and then across the barren wastelands, down here in the foreground, we see like a little sea monkey creature that has maybe legs broken off, and it's kind of deformed, its skull's not shaped right, as if maybe not all of them grew perfectly. Not all of them were able to ascend to a kingdom and belong somewhere. And so the story of the kind of outcasts was like a perfect build-up to a villain. So here's this character that's kind of shucking off these pieces, and it's kind of growing. And again, the bottom panel here I end up using for a rendering reference for actual inking. So unfortunately I cut that one off, and that's in my archive somewhere. But this is essentially that character. After he kind of roars to life, he hunches over and he's kind of catching himself under his own weight because his mass, maybe he just ended up growing very deformed, very massively large. And then out of the side, this little hand comes in and gently caresses his ear, drawing his attention, like, huh? And so as it grabs his chin and turns his head to that direction, we get a reveal of what was going to be the villainess. And we'll notice her horns. I was really focusing on the idea that in this story arc, there would be characters that had like horns, and their horns would be like a sign of their own lineage, like royalty. And so if they had actual horns, then they were meant to be a higher figure. Whereas if they just had softer antenna or didn't have any antenna at all, then they were just kind of like peasants. So here we even established she already has like a trident type of weapon. She already has some sort of armor on her. So she's maybe been around for a while in this tank. Then we cut to these other kind of deformed characters on this next page with like these very scaly looking oversized arms, this very demonic looking spikied one, maybe one with like 2 heads. And so I kept coming up with these different ideas of this like hunched over almost goblin-like one, and so that does essentially become her own army, and she's rallying them while sort of sitting on top of the shoulders of the big massive guy, and they're all saluting her like with their tails, in a way of sort of like, long live, or, almost like a Nazi salute or something. Instead, they kind of spike their tails up in the air as a salute. So then the foreboding sense of evil doom coming, we get this inset of her head, extreme close-up, while she's maybe delivering some kind of dialogue, foreboding towards the king and the queen who now sit on the throne of that kingdom. Segueing into that that throne room. We see the king and queen up on their throne, and they have almost like a court jester or an announcer, maybe like a lord marshal, saying like, I now present, His Majesty's royal, and yes, I put in synchronized swimming sea monkeys. Try saying that 7 times fast. And so they put on this sort of display of swimming around and dancing in the water, and so then there's this sequence of just random forms moving fluidly, only to be broken up by this huge explosion. And again, this also shows my level of amateur at the time, where I didn't actually know how to work with page boundaries, and here I am drawing like all the way off the page, and if this was actually to be trimmed, I'm losing like this much of the actual detail, and you're barely getting an idea. Even these characters on the side are going to be trimmed off. You wouldn't be able to see that this is a face right here, even if it's in 3/4 looking away. So after the explosion kicks off, boom! Then we get the official hero pose of the villain. We get the splash page entrance of her breaking down the door with her powerful trident, just aglow with energy. And she has that determined look that says she's about to overthrow this false queen. Which, of course, shock and awe. They're all startled. Different reaction faces from nobles from the court, the king himself, and so on. And then her confident stride in. She has her feet sort of striding in. I don't know why. Didn't even process to me that she should be swimming in, but I gave her a confident walk. I don't know why. So here she is walking through the courts with her own men kind of pouring in behind her. There's the big brutish one and little different figurines. So she sort of holds back her brutish one, saying like, "Oh, I've brought my muscle. Don't think you can stop me, but I come to claim the throne." But of course, denial. "No, you have no right to the throne." And here cowers the would-be queen that does not have the actual hardened horns. He's like, my wife by right, and I have free choice, and so on. And she's like, "But I have queen status by birthright," and she's pointing out her hardened horns, and, "Honey, is this true?" And he's like, "Don't worry, baby. Okay, yeah, maybe, but don't worry." And then, then there's the brutish-looking guy who's sort of looking over at the scene like, "I got this." So we see the other character in the foreground with his, like, really scabby forearms, and the other brute dude in the middle ground with the villainess there, and they're swimming in to take away the queen, and he's kind of just allowing it to happen like, "Oh, crap, baby, I really can't do anything." So here she is being tugged away like, "No, do something, who cares about the birthright and the hardened antenna," or what have you. And so then we have this villainess moment where she's sort of rubbing it in. She's not having to like, "Oh, what a pretty little face you've chosen." And this still was early on, too, in the concept that I wasn't really fleshing them out fully like a real monkey face. I was kind of going back and forth, maybe just humanoid, and as you can tell the other page, she actually has regular feet as opposed to hand feet like actual apes. But of course the king eventually has a breaking point. He's extremely angry and livid, dives in and lunges at the villainess or would-be queen, to which her big brute catches him right by the face. And the two of them begin like a very 90s kind of just throwdown, just knockdown, drag out. So the king gets slammed into the ground by this big brute force. The big brute force chucks him out of the actual throne room and through the roof. Comes out the other side. Comes down to the ground. And this was something else I was still struggling with too, because by this time, this is page 20. I mean, it's got to be like at least 11 o'clock at night. We're talking probably 14 hours into the 24-hour challenge, where my brain is just so swollen up from drawing. I'm trying to think, like, how do I make a motion where he's both being thrown and impacting the wall and coming out the other side of the wall and impacting the ground. And so there's still a lot here that was kind of chunky, because my inner laziness was deciding to draw less and just do it in 2 panels instead of 1 panel of him being thrown, then a close-up shot maybe here of the impact of him going and blowing through the exterior wall, then a shot down here of him tumbling, with maybe 1 stationary shot here of him completely pile driving into the ground. I could have done this in 4 panels. I tried pulling it off in 2, but it just comes off as chunky, I feel. So actually I realized I did 22 pages, not 20. So the king now has his horns broken off, and he's sort of dethroned by power anyway, but he's not going to give up, nose bleeding, he's not done. So he kind of rallies himself back up, and he swims back in through the hole, goes back after the big brute guy, and then he uses some weird sort of tail swipe. I don't know why, but I made his tail like razor sharp, and he just slices the big brute guy in half, and then swims back up to the opening carrying the top half of the big brute. The villainess is a bit startled. The queen is still paused, almost in disbelief, and then the big brute's body just slams and hits the ground. And for whatever reason, the queen has now disappeared from this panel. I forgot to draw her in. But here she is kind of looking face down to her own king, like, you didn't do anything. You let them take me. And he's like, yeah, but I changed my mind and I lost my own throne, because he lost his crown, lost his horns or whatever. And it never wrapped up. That was the end. That was the end of my 22 pages. But where that idea took me is I enjoyed the concept from its original inspiration. To say to myself, you can take something like those little advertisements inside old comic books where it just shows like a cute little family and they're sitting in front of a medieval castle, and isn't that adorable? And I thought, in the original Inception, if they really did exist in a medieval environment, would they really be that happy? I mean, especially if that's like a king and queen and that's a medieval environment. Like, what would travel be like? Would they ride seahorses? Obviously. What type of weapons would they use? Would it be medieval? Because there's a castle in the background of that original advertisement. So a lot of that started spitballing, and that's what created that 22-page comic. But I wasn't done with it. It was too manic. It was too fast-paced. It was too... how do I put this? It was too 90s. Yeah. To be very straightforward. Although I actually drew feet. So there's that. But I reconceived the idea. I went back to the drawing board, and I kept on me this right here. Just a little moleskin, just dollar store. Got this from the dollar store. And in fact, there's a whole bunch of them. So I bought multiple, and I use these for journals for a lot of different things. But all I did with this is I would take this to the pool while my kids would swim during the summer, and I would just start writing plot and story ideas in the actual book, and then. It didn't matter about the order. If I just had an idea of a sequence of sea monsters infected with something. As I got all these different ideas, I'd write them down here and start listing them. When I was done with that, I took that list and turned it into a bunch of post-it notes, handwritten out, and the post-it notes had all different visuals. In fact, let me go ahead and pull down. This is volume 4, 3, 2. There we go. There's volume 1. Oh wait, I forgot. As I finished them, I threw them all away. Here we go. These were extra notes. These are extra notes that I never used, but I had my own visual system to work with, almost like the way we would sketch something for ourselves. So anything that kind of was on an explosion post-it note, anything that was on an explosion was like an action kind of moment, a conflict. Anything that was on pink was like a tender moment, a heartfelt moment, maybe even a loving moment between two characters. Anything that was yellow would be something that was introspective, something the character was kind of taking in about their overall existence, some sort of internal lesson maybe that they were learning. Or even if it was like the beginning portion of them learning that lesson, here's a moment that leads to them later on learning some sort of internal lesson. I had this big, I guess you could call it pink. It's like this orangish red pink color. This was for the real world. Because I transitioned back and forth from the actual kid in the real world and the sea monkey world, when I transferred back and forth, I needed notes specifically so I could tell how often I transferred back and forth per issue. So once I had these all written out on the different coordinated, color coordinated pieces, I would lay them out on the floor in chronological order. So there's my secret for writing. That's how I kind of organize the chaos of ideas as they flood to us, like it does with artists. So all that came down to writing, and writing the actual script and putting it all together. So I've plotted out 4 volumes worth, all in chronological order. and I've now written 12 issues worth. Issue 1 and 2 are already drawn, inked, published. Issue 3 is drawn, inked, ready to be published. That's why we have our Kickstarter campaign kicking off. It's already live. There's less than a month left. So go to Kickstarter, look for the Brine, issue 3. Otherwise, follow the link in the description, and you'll be able to see these exact pages right here with word balloons. So here's a little sneak preview of issue 3. So to see that transition of where I came from, those loose hen scratches and weird little layouts and stuff, to this kind of story build up and this kind of story follow through. As you can tell, I figured out my pacing a little bit better with going from moment to moment and action to action, transitioning through the scene from one person to the other. Transitioning from camera angles, going from extreme low to extreme high angles. I mean, I was really playing around a lot. I was experimenting. I was really taking a lot of chances. And I figured I could do that because it's an independent book anyway. I could take those kind of chances, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, but I'll experiment. And that way I'll learn, and each issue it just kept getting better. And so here it is. I mean, it all came from those very original 24-hour Comic Days pages. And now it's resulting in issue 3, ready to print, adventure story of underwater fantasy and medieval aquatic apes. And again, there you go. As you can tell, I drew hand feet. So I didn't draw just feet. I actually drew hand feet. I kind of cursed myself because every character I've designed, because it's an ape, has hands for feet. Even if this one, it looks like I forgot the thumb, but it's actually here, hidden behind the bubbles. You can see it. There's that. There's that. Real! Look out! So I'm glad you tuned in. Hope you enjoyed the video. Once again, I'm Nick Feutz. This is Lead Base Studios, and they're still ghosting on my screen. I don't know why it does that. But if you can, check out our Kickstarter. Become a backer today. There's many different levels of support. There's digital support. You can even just support with money without picking one of the actual tiers. You can just donate to the cause. But if you can, support the Brine on Kickstarter today. Hop on there, any major credit card, log in, create an account if you want to. You don't have to. You can still use your credit card, but look for it. See it. Buy it. Back it. Own it. And the next video I will be doing will be coming up soon. I did kind of hint towards it on my last video. And there's the theme. So I'll be doing a drawing video on that theme right there, Thundercats. All thanks to Thundercats Roar and their campaign of stirring up internet and trolling people. I have no idea if that's going to legitimately be an actual show from Cartoon Network, or if that's just some kind of long-running Saturday Night Live skit. I don't know. I can't tell. But my passion and love from the original Thundercats kind of maybe helped spawn the Brine. Maybe. I mean, animalistic, bipedal heroes, medieval fantasy. Yeah, I still have a love for the original Thundercats. So I'll be doing a couple of sketches of Thundercats characters next time. So tune in next time. And again, thanks for watching. Thanks for coming to Lead Base Studios. And support us on Kickstarter.